All right. Somebody chat to us in the chat if you can see us live. And let's make sure. Oh, there's nobody in here. Let me make sure I have the right link. Whoa, we are live. Stuart, maybe you can talk while I make sure everyone has the right shareable link for what we're doing right now, about our series and what we're up to with this live stream.
Okay, guys, good morning. We're finally live, a little bit late, but still live. And we're going to talk this morning about what's really been going on in the economy, New York City, and the effects of the pandemic, and where we are in the world of real estate. So as soon as we get hooked up here, we're going to have our famous moderator, Marielle, help us do this.
This has us live, the power of technology. So, Stuart, let's see, host chat. There we go. Can hear you. All good. Yay. Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Everyone move over. New link. New link. Yay. Here we go. We're just going to give everyone a second to pop over here with us. And we have until about noon until we're moving over to Clubhouse. So we have plenty of time. New link. Yay, three of you guys are in here. We're just giving everybody a chance to move on over from the old link. Sorry about that. Not sure why that was giving us some trouble, but we're here now and it's a beautiful Friday and we are excited to get going. So let's get started. Stuart, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Stuart Gelb. I'm the CEO and president of a company called The Liquidity Source. And we're here today with Marielle to talk about the pandemic, the economy, and where we are today. Because we had met months ago and did a video to talk about what we thought it was then and what it is now.
Yeah, so we did an awesome series called Real Solutions. And Stuart, tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll talk about what we covered in that series and what we're doing here today. It's kind of like where are we now from, I want to say November, December when we filmed that, which seems like just yesterday, but yes. Somehow it's already April.
Yeah, a lot has changed, and maybe what we thought about back then is not exactly the same as today, but we are still in the pandemic, so we can go through some questions and answers here and get everybody on board where we think we are and where we're going.
So can you give us a little bit, like we started that series with the state of New York City real estate. And this was back in November, back in kind of like the moment. It was really getting, I don't want to say too dark, but it was getting really deep.
It was dark. It was dark
and deep. Time. It really was. And right. So tell us a little bit about what was up then and paint us a little picture of the state of things when we filmed that series.
So I think when we filmed that series, we're in the midst of the pandemic, and talking about New York City specifically, it's interesting because the economy of New York City is really the largest municipal and regional economy in the United States and maybe in the whole world. So with the pandemic gripping us as it was, Long Island Railroad was shut down. The subways were basically shut down. The theater district was shut down. Tourism, which is like, I don't know, like 50 million people a year, I think, come into New York City, was not happening at all because the planes weren't going.
Yeah.
And basically we were at a standstill. And businesses were suffering and real estate was really suffering. And offices, people weren't going to the offices anymore. People were afraid of going to the elevator and touch the buttons. The economy is basically shut down. And we were talking at the time about, predicting and not sure when the vaccines would kick in. I mean, we really weren't in a great state with the vaccines at the time. In fact, they really weren't even started, I think, until December. And then we had to vaccinate 300 million people. And how is that going to happen? Then we were in the middle also of the political climate and the, and change of presidents. And so much was going on that it was really, we were just predicting what we thought was going to happen. We weren't really sure, but we were really definitely under it in a big way.
Yeah. We had a moratorium on rent evictions. We on tenant evictions. We had some just, obviously interesting political climate at that moment. And so fast forward to where we are today in, April 2nd. Wow.
Right.
It's wild. 2021. Doesn't 2021 feel like we should be on like a spaceship by now somewhere in outer space, right?
Yes,
it's like you just missed all of 2020 and we were reborn into April of 2021. Here we are. So what's the latest?
So just like it was a few months ago, and the political climate has been similar, the moratorium on rents and the moratorium on evictions continue to be extended. I think that the feeling is, let's protect the tenants, but there's still a vilification of landlords, and there's a lot of people, and some of them, it's true, are in bad spots, but some are being a bit opportunistic, not paying rents. So you have landlords, especially there's a lot of landlords that don't have deep pockets. It's not like every landlord in New York City is rich. And they have mortgages to pay and taxes to pay and utilities to pay and no income coming in. So this is still a very difficult problem on that portion.
Right.
Things that we're seeing now today in the last couple days, there's been some positive news as well. Vaccines seem to be coming on board in a big way. There's a lot more positiveness in the air, like today I opened up, the TV this morning, CNBC, to find out that the jobs that they were hoping would be 500,000 or 600,000 were 916,000. And the stock markets at the height, and the S&P's the highest it's ever been in history. And out of the 916,000 jobs, travel and hospitality was 200,000, which is a big thing too, because that was like, travel and hospitality has been really hit. I mean, hotels, right? Hotels, restaurants, gyms, travel, all this has been really hit hard. So there's a lot more positive feeling going on. I mean, we still have a ways to go, but there's a lot more positive things going on. In fact, this morning also I was listening to Bill Rudin from Rudin Management, and his take on it is that he all of a sudden the last couple of months have been getting very busy, even on office space. People like Amazon have been coming in, Google, Facebook took a major space. We're starting.
You have tenants really making some significant bets on New York City, and not only New York City, but just like the back to work, the physical in-person office. You see, Facebook took that big office near Hudson Yards. You see Governor Cuomo even deciding to sink, I believe it was $60 million into building out infrastructure to connect Penn Station over to the High Line. And I believe it has a lot to do with that. And so I think that the city of New York is finally starting to align some incentives for some of these bigger companies to continue to put down roots here, make investments for the future, and like have infrastructure support that. So that's exciting. And it sounds like you're really optimistic. And you also touched on hospitality as well as entertainment. And we know we've heard some travel, but we've heard some things about Broadway. We've heard some things about, I know, Lincoln Center.
De Blasio's predicting or saying that by September 1st, the theater district will be open, which will bring in another 100,000 employees and annual income of 15 billion a year. So that's really positive stuff, right? Because it's like, and you're hearing all these things about like the last couple of months, you have brokers that have been busier now, even in the residential space, than they have in a year. People are coming back. People are coming back in a big way. And sales volume is up huge. Yes, at lower numbers, but it still forms a base, right? It's a base of confidence. It's not like people are not coming back.
Right.
So all this is positive news, and we have a lot to look forward to. I think also one of the concerns, what we thought was, we talked about back then, which was with the moratorium on rents and evictions, which is extended, that we thought that the default rate was going to be much higher than it is now. But interestingly enough, we're getting a lot of support from the banks. First of all, the banks sound like they were in 2008 when everybody had no cash, no capital. Today, they're pretty liquid. So they're kind of, I've talked to banks in the last few days, they're kind of giving people somewhat of a pass on principal and interest. And they're waiting until the emergency kind of like rides out a little bit more before they're going to say to them, you know, you got to pony up, which we didn't feel that way 4 or 5 months ago. We thought it was going to be devastation. In fact, I was reading reports that there was $250 billion worth of money raised at private equity firms, with 75 billion that was going to be for distressed. And they thought they were going to just kill it. They were going to buy a lot of deals really on the level. And now those guys are a little bit disappointed. I mean, because that's what they do for a living, right? but over the United States, out in New York, rents are up 1.5%. A lot of areas are doing really well. Texas is on fire. Their economy's up, and markets in the real estate up over 9%. So the deals they're getting are not equivalent to the yields that they were hoping for, and yet they're deploying the money, because what are they going to do with $75 billion if they don't deploy? I mean, they have to deploy it even if they make lower amounts, right? So
they'll be fine. They'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out. So I think it's better news for us and the people, but it just shows what a vast turn things have had to take. So I think it's all good. Yeah, I think it's great.
I think we're happy about that. So
I think very happy.
Do you have any, like, I know you always have like some cool deals that you've been doing recently. You've been helping people figure it out in creative ways. Are there any like specific ones that you're like, yeah, this one deal that I just did?
Sure. I'm going to have a couple just to run by, because you can see that this is still because of the pandemic. I mean, we are in a pandemic, and people are not, and landlords in New York City especially, are not collecting their rents. And when you're not collecting rents, whether the bank is giving you a pass right now and not holding off on collecting principal and interest, understand that it affects things like debt service coverage ratios, global cash flows. All these things are on the downside, so it's hard for them to get mortgages. So let me give you a couple examples of what we've been able to do, because being in the commercial finance space, I have the ability to go to 30 or 40 different banks and to do deals. I'm not stuck with one because of vanilla and they said they can't do it just because it doesn't check the boxes. So a couple things that recently happened. The co-op space, a lot of them have been hurt because the ground floor, they have commercial rents coming in, and those commercial rents are typically used to pay expenses in the building. Some of those people have stopped paying their rent completely, and therefore the building doesn't have the money to pay certain bills. So they have a couple options. One option would be get a capital assessment from their tenants. That's not always easy, depends on the size that we're talking about. And some think that they can go to the bank, but the problem with the bank is no one's assigned personally, and if the income's not there, why would the bank give a loan? Right? So I have a couple banks that I work with that I'll give you like an example. So there's a very strong co-op in this city, downtown, that doesn't have a large amount of units, but they're all rented. and they lost a commercial guy after 30 years, paying $300,000 a year, and $285,000 was for taxes. Well, they couldn't go to a small group and get an annualized amount of $300,000. That's a lot to ask the 10 or 12 tenants to give to. But because of the strength of the co-op, we were able to get them an interest-only loan, and for $1 million, they're going to be able to draw down only what they need with no prepayment penalty and not a ridiculously high rate in the low 5% area, and they're going to be fine. Where a lot of banks would just say, no, we're not doing anything. There's no rent coming in. And by the way, it was non-recourse, so nobody was signing. So nobody was signing, and the money is there and at their, available for them at their, just to draw down. So this is great, and we had the ability to do that. And another example was another client of mine had a very strong building in the Tribeca area, and they lost their ground floor tenant. Replaced by another tenant, but that tenant also started paying less than half the rent, and then every month a different rent. So that income became ineligible for the bank, right?
Sure.
So they had very little net operating income to show, but because of the savings of the owner, that he had millions of dollars in the bank account, they had the ability to pay. And because the asset itself was very strong, we were able to get this man a few $1 million on a loan to move forward, to do what he had to do. He had some work to do, and he had money there, to save him. So there's definitely opportunities out there, but you have to know where to go.
Well, it's interesting. I've been on Clubhouse a lot, as you know, and I've heard a lot of people who are talking about, their one banker, right? You build a relationship. Obviously, commercial real estate, it's all relationships. You build a really great relationship with your one banker, and people feel like that person, that institution, they're looking out for their best interest, and they probably are, but they're one. Right. And so that becomes a challenge. And so what I've been hearing a lot on Clubhouse is, how do I know if I am getting all of the opportunities that are available to me? And then the other thing that I'm hearing, so it's cool. So I'm saying that because it's cool that you have so many different things, different relationships, different people who you can kind of see the array of opportunities when you're helping your clients. And then the other thing that I'm hearing, or just last night, was about how it's really hard to find deals, which is kind of interesting, right? Because you would think, and like you said, there should be an influx of deals right now. So people should have kind of like their pick of the litter, if you will. But and I don't know if it's just that it's not there, because I'm sure it is, but I'm sure it's a combination of there aren't as many deals as one may have originally thought there would be during this time. And also the advice that kind of like was a theme in the room was, you have to make really, really strong relationships with the brokers, right? Because a lot of times the brokers, if you bring them if they bring you a reliable deal, a good deal, and you push it through, and you don't have an issue and a deal gets done, it's much more likely that before putting that deal on the market, they're coming directly to you as a buyer before, so they don't have to go through all the headache of that. So you fall somewhere kind of in the middle, where you're kind of this advisor. You probably see a variety of opportunities and deals as well, both on the buyer and then also on the seller side. So okay, I said a lot. Unpack some of it from your perspective.
So I agree with you. One thing that he said was very true and very strong here is that people do get comfortable with one bank. Because whatever people do for a living, whether they're developers or they own, or they're making donuts, or they're in the restaurant business or in the gym, it doesn't matter. They have one bank that they kind of count on to get things done, because it's always been that way. But these are extremely unusual times. So you could simply have a bank that's been great for you that has no ability to refinance because you're not getting the revenue.
Right.
You're getting the revenue. Yeah, the model doesn't work. So if you were getting $250,000 a year, and we'll call it like on a 5-cap building, and your building was worth $5 million, well, now you're collecting $125,000 a year, and based on the bank, it's going to be worth $2.5 million. So if you need to get a loan or you already have a loan there, the bank will not be able to do that. So the other issue for them is by not having access, it's not so easy. It's not like a residential where you walk into a bank and say, oh, I want to make a loan on a building. You wouldn't even know who to talk to. So it's really important that you try to work with somebody that has access to management at the bank so they know who to talk to and who can get certain things done. It's not just about walking into a bank and say, I'd like a loan and fill out a piece of paper like residential, so to speak. So that's really important to have somebody that has that connectivity in the market under duress times like this.
So we talked about during our series, we also talked about kind of the health of the portfolio. And sometimes when you have one really, really, still kind of strong performing asset, you expect to be able to refinance or, use that in the scheme of things. But it's really kind of the total kind of picture. Can you just jump back to that?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. So for some of you that may not know that when you have multiple properties and you go to a bank for a loan, they always ask for what they call a global cash flow. And the global cash flow is like we talked about, like a medical report, right? You're gonna look and see how healthy they are. So when you go into the global cash flow, you'll have a list of all the properties that you own. And remember, keep in mind, every property, because if you go back to your leases and you've given people contractual deals or abatements on rent, or you've given them 50% off, whatever it is, you have to change their net operating income on every one of those properties. And also think about what the appraised value would be, because with cap rates possibly rising and the valuations go down, that global cash flow has changed dramatically. And the banks have ratios on the totality. So they run a ratio, let's just call it 1.25 to 1.35, and all of a sudden you're at 1.0. And you may have a building there that's totally unencumbered. You have a great building that the tenant's paying, all the tenants are there, they're all paying, but when they lump everything together on the global cash flow and they put everything together, like the medical report, the body is not 100% right. So most banks will not do anything for you. But there, like I say, if you know where to go, there are some banks that will work with you. But again, it's not necessarily that one bank that you've been living with and working with. So that's a big issue. It's still an issue today. And the banks are being supportive by giving you relief. And by the way, even when you sign it, because every deal that I do now, they have a COVID-19 questionnaire. They go actually and they say, okay, I understand these are the leases. Give me copies of the leases. Give me copies of the deposits for the last 6 months. Let me see if they're paying on time and if they're paying the amount that says so on the lease. Because the truth is, the landlords, and not some of them do, I'm not saying for all of them, the landlords, when they get rents decreased, they don't necessarily run back to the bank and say, oh, by the way, I just want you to know I'm getting half my rent. Because they're afraid the bank's going to be off the wall, right? And they're breaking covenants and all kinds of problems. So they may hide that fact. But when they go for the refinance or they go to borrow money, all this comes out. So this is still going on.
All right, we have about 15 minutes left. I want to bring in Emily if she's there. I want to get into a little bit of a co-working flex space. Hey, Em, a little bit of a flex space conversation because one thing that was really, really, really unique about our series is we got to talk a little bit about flex space and short-term lease financing, which is very unusual, a hot topic. I love this topic. And you have you're kind of, your whole world is flex space, short-term lease, that kind of thing, co-working spaces. So let's get into it. Let's hear what the state of things is.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually operate a co-working space called WorkSmart Co-working out on Long Island. It's been a really interesting time, I'd say, in the flex space universe, just because of the mandate to work from home kind of changed everyone's lives. So what's been, happening for us over the last year is that, first we were scared, like what's going to happen? Are we going to be able to even stay in business? To now people are coming to flex spaces because they need to get out of the house. Like that return to the workplace is so important to all of us. And I think, not just to the real estate industry, but for people as well. I feel like, the workplace is a second home for many. Like, you have your home life and you have your work home. And I try to have that be my methodology with how we run Work Smart, is that this can be that second place for people, even if they aren't back in their office in Manhattan. They're, here in their hometown, here on Long Island, they can pop in and have the flexibility with, different kind of membership tiers to get what they need without having to go fully back to work. And then from the employer's point of view, that productivity is still able to stay up, because this is a professional environment. We do have, private offices, and then we have the open collaboration space, the same as many other co-working environments. So I think that that's been the one big shift for all of us who are operating spaces, is that originally the big open collaboration space was seen as like, what a cool thing. But then, COVID hit. We're not going to be sharing space the same way. So we have to you have to reconfigure your whole kind of floor plan to expect, for social distancing, just to make sure people are safe. You don't want to have a bunch of clustered people together. Whereas in the past, like I've worked in WeWorks before myself, I just remember that feeling of, oh, I'm going in and I can meet anybody. It's now a lot more structured. It's kind of on the co-working side to help the people in the workplace. So there's a new responsibility for flex space operators to not only ensure safety but for people, but then how do we get the same feeling that you get in a co-working space with COVID? So you might want to do more networking events, things that are more structured, and that's what makes it a unique time for us.
Wow, a time where you could go in and say, I could meet anyone, or a network, even just to hear the words like networking event. That's like a little bit heavy on my heart.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, right? The design phase of the co-working and flex spaces, going from, open design floor plans, like that was the thing. That was the thing for so long. People aspired to get out of that like corner office mentality, have this open floor plate so people can collaborate and work together and by chance run into each other in moments throughout the day that maybe they wouldn't normally. And that makes a lot of sense in theory. But I think what we learned really quickly is the actual productivity aspect of that is not really there, right? People do need dedicated workspace that's just their own, that's quiet, that's for themselves. And I think now that's become more than just a nice to have. It's necessary. And so it will be interesting. We talk a little about WeWork. WeWork is finally going public with a $9 billion valuation, which is wild. And they predict occupancy up, to 90% by 2022, which is absolutely wild to think about, especially as I think occupancy in New York City is teetering around between 11 and 13%. And so that will be interesting to see. And I'm curious if they are going to be retrofitting their space, like how they're going to be retrofitting their spaces. They have to. It's not an if, it's how did they do it? How are they going to keep doing it? And how are they keeping it clean and healthy and making people feel excited to be there, to have that 90% occupancy by sometime in 2022? Like that would be mind blowing. I hope that happens. That would be incredible for all of us. I'm just like, how? Show me how.
Exactly. And I feel like in terms of short-term leases, like that whole, I would say, like, 7 years ago when I was in space, like that people were like shocked, like, oh, they're offering these short-term office spaces. Like it doesn't make sense from a bankable standpoint, which is what, Stuart talks about. And now they are the leaders. They've already done it for years. And all of these other, commercial real estate owners are kind of having to adapt to the short-term lease style. So like, I think there is that advantage point for flex spaces where people want short-term leases right now because they don't know what's going to happen. And this kind of shook everyone up. So, what's the next thing? And then I guess, Stuart, if you want to kind of weigh in on the financing part of flex spaces, I wonder how it's going to change the banking industry as well.
So I know, and Marianne, we started talking about this a couple of days ago. So I think that, I can't predict that by next year they're going to be 90% full. But I was listening to Rudin this morning again on CNBC. There's a couple things going on. You have something like WeWork that people are going to be able to go in and not sign long commitments to space, which was always a thing. Big deal. But they also have, but believe it or not, as he said, that they have a number of people coming in, of course, opportunistic at lower numbers. Like we know that Facebook got like 18 months of free rent in New York City, but they're designing space specific because of the pandemic in certain ways. They're going to take 8 or 12 months to fix up that space. And those people are going to sign longer leases. They're not going to sign up for the rents that they did only a year ago or, prior to the pandemic. But both are happening at the same time. The other thing is, as far as the financing goes, and we discussed this a little bit on our last, when we did our last video series, is that when you have a whole building, it's very difficult to have a whole building of flex space with no commitment on the terms of the leases, because banks finance on cash flow and on longevity of the leases. Banks don't just finance because you can show you have income coming in. And they go by the tenants and they go by the length of the leases. So I think what's great about what G2D does in their workspace is that it's an element in the building that may be 10 or 15% of the space. So you can do like what they call a master lease. I mean, it could be done in a larger building also. They do a master lease and they sign personally for that. And the bank knows that all that money is coming in. But then you may have people that are very strong in the market, like a Related or someone that's really strong. They might want to do 50% of their business. Well, they're strong enough. They may not need more than 50% financing. So they, in fact, may not even have to sign personally on that flex space because they can afford to run. You just can't take buildings and turn them into part-time. And I think the reason that WeWork had that ability was because they had a backer called SoftBank, right? And SoftBank they made $100 billion in the Chinese when they when they did that deal overseas. But today it's not so easy to do that. So it depends on what you can do in order to get financing. But there are ways to get it done.
And traditionally, the landlords are assuming the risk of any sort of co-working aspect or, like you said, short-term lease, flex space. So when WeWork came on the scene, landlords were like, great, you're backed by SoftBank. We don't have to assume the risk of leasing out this space. You guys will assume all the risk. And it was an interesting model. And it sounds nice for the landlord for, a while. And then, we see how it's been going so far.
Yeah, not bankable.
Not bankable. We have a question from Doug and Nikki. We're leaving New York to remote work from elsewhere. Welcome to the club. Any advice on subletting out of office space in Melville on Long Island, my new project? So any advice on subletting? Has this come up, subletting? Because I can imagine there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, see you later in New York. And actually, it's happened quite a bit. We see the influence.
It's in the news all the time, but the sublet numbers are really, really low. To get people to come take your space, it's not like a regular market. They're really taking. Listen, there's a lot of things. How long are you subleasing it for, right? If you need a 3 or 4 or 5 year lease, subleased, you're going to take a pretty big hit, in my opinion.
Right.
If you have something that's going to be only 8 months or a year, something small, maybe not so bad.
And there are a lot of companies like Liquid Space, Pivot Desk, which I think they got sold. I don't know if they're still intact in the same way. Regis, yeah, but Regis has its own brand. Liquid Space, as an example, or Pure Space is another one. PER space.com. Liquid Space is one. I've known them for years, and basically it's a marketplace for people to come and rent space. So it could be for a day. I use Pure Space, Liquid Space a lot to do video shoots, so I'll rent a studio for a day. But they're working a lot more with subletted office space, hotel conference space that's totally underutilized, a variety of spaces that are just completely underutilized and probably get you a really good deal. So I can imagine it works the other way too. So if you have an underutilized space, it's likely you could be like listing that space on one of those platforms. If you have a building that doesn't need that much flex space, you can get a premium because now you've given people an opportunity to come into a small place. So you may get double or triple the amount of what the rent would normally be called for. That would be cool.
Yeah, so I think I think that happens.
That would be awesome. I agree with you though. And then so it's interesting in terms of, tenant improvement and retrofitting. Like you just talked about Facebook having 18 months free rent, but Facebook doesn't have, or, whatever building owner is giving that 18 months, they don't have just, funds laying around for tenant improvements to cater to the new needs of COVID for health and safety regulations, even if there are even health and safety regulations. I don't know if we have a governing standard body on this yet, kind of to standardize health and wellness for the sake of COVID and re-entry. I'm sure New York State has some sort of guidelines, but you don't have anything coming from like the well building standard or anything like that. It is interesting. Specifically for COVID, but there's a whole host of tenant improvements that need to be done. And I'm sure each tenant has kind of their own recipe for how they're going to get it done. So the fact that Facebook has 18 months free rent, I mean, that's not free money. That's money that's being deployed into figuring out how to make their workspace feasible so that they're not, leasing space for 13% occupancy. Nobody needs that to be the case, because that's.
Well, first of all, there's a couple things going on. I think that the landlords understand with all this free space that they have to be very flexible in their charging to get the deal done, right? So they really have to think about, what they're going to charge the people. But the flex space will be changed over time. I mean, a lot of the space, they're going to need a lot more space because of social distancing. And we don't know how long that's going to be, the social distancing, but if you had 200 people like sitting next to each other now, and you're going to take 100 people now instead of 200, and everything's going to be social distance, you still need almost the same size space.
Well, you imagine that not everyone will be back at work in the office at the same time. Not everyone's coming back for 5 days a week. There are going to be specific instances, right? You don't need to be in 5 days a week. You need to be in for specific moments where you're collaborating with your team, or you're training new hires, or you have a physical piece of hardware that you need to utilize at the office. And so I hope that that's the case. It's a whole kind of reimagination of what the space is needed for. But the fact that people are not saying, we don't need space, but they're actually taking leases now to garner that 18 months free so that they can make a realistic investment into the future of actually working with people. That is extremely promising. I mean, there are plenty of companies that have said, you never have to come back to work. And that's also really interesting. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that that's, I think that while they're living through this, they have a different take on it than when things change. I mean, Emily and I, for example, we've had this conversation. I could simply call Emily on every Friday and spend 2 hours with her on Zoom. And yet I drive 45 minutes to sit in front of her. And we talked about why. Because the energy and the creativity and being in front of people means so much more. I mean, it's great that we have things like Zoom. Don't get me wrong, because without Zoom, what would we do when we can't leave the house?
And YouTube and Clubhouse that we're about to be on in 1 minute.
But we still want to be with people, and then energy is really, really important. It's much better than a phone call or a Zoom call.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to wrap up because we are heading over to Clubhouse under the Disrupt CRE Club for a 12 o'clock chat. We invite all of you guys to come join us there so that you can be part of the chat. So this was awesome. Stuart caught us up a little bit about what's been going on since our Real Solutions series, which is on disruptcre.com. You guys can go watch it. It's a 6-part series. Each episode is pretty short and we get straight to the point. But we're going to be, seeing you guys, hopefully some of you on Clubhouse right now. And Stuart, let's go. Let's get out of here.
And thank you, Maria. Thank you. And thank you, Emily.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye, guys. Hopefully see you on Clubhouse.
Okay. Thanks.
Happy Friday.